The day began in the usual quiet way for the maid who had worked in the large house for almost 2 years. She moved through the halls with soft steps, the same way she always did, making sure not to disturb anyone. The house itself felt like a different world to her, a place full of polished floors, huge windows, and quiet rooms that belonged to people who lived a life far from her own. She never tried to fit into that world. She simply did her work, stayed respectful, tried her best to stay unnoticed. But even though she moved quietly, the two young boys of the house always noticed her. They had grown used to her gentle presence, the way she smiled at them without forcing conversation, and the way she understood their moods before anyone else did. The twins were full of energy from the moment they woke up. She had learned how to guide their excitement without raising her voice. The parents trusted her with them more than most people in the house, because the boys listened to her even on their worst days. On that particular afternoon, the house felt unusually busy. The parents were rushing around preparing for an important meeting. The staff seemed tense, and the boys were running around, full of restless energy. The maid tried to complete her tasks, but the twins kept returning to her, tugging at her sleeve, trying to tell her stories, or simply following her from room to room. She didn't mind. She had grown fond of them. Even though she always kept a respectful distance, when the parents realized that their usual driver wasn't available and they needed someone they trusted to accompany the twins to the mall, their eyes naturally turned to her. She was arranging cushions on the sofa when she heard her name. She looked up, a little startled because she rarely heard her name spoken aloud in that home unless something unusual was happening. The parents explained the situation quickly. They needed the boys to be taken out for a little while, something to help them burn off the restless energy that filled the house. They asked if she could take them to the mall. She hesitated for a moment, not because she didn't want to go, but because she always tried to avoid being in any place where she might look out of place. She never forgot that she wore a simple uniform in a world filled with designer clothes and expensive accessories, but the parents spoke kindly, almost apologetic about the sudden request, and the boys were already jumping with excitement at the thought of leaving the house. She nodded and agreed. The twins cheered loudly, and she couldn't help but smile softly. She gathered their things, made sure they were dressed warmly, and guided them to the car. The family's second driver prepared. The ride to the mall was filled with the boys' excited chatter. They asked her questions about everything they saw on the way. They talked about toys, games, and a new food stall they had heard about inside the mall. She listened patiently, answering when needed but mostly letting them talk. They trusted her not only because she cared for them, but because she never talked down to them. She treated them like real people, something kids feel more than anyone realizes. When they reached the mall, the twins practically ran ahead, but she called them back gently. They stopped, turned around, and waited for her before moving again. She always appreciated that small sign of respect from them. The mall was crowded that day. People filled the walkways, chatting, shopping, watching displays, and enjoying the weekend. The twins held onto her hands as they walked through the busy area, looking around with wide eyes. They first went to a toy store, where the boys pressed their faces against the glass to admire new items. She followed them inside, keeping an eye on both to make sure they didn't wander too far. The store was lively, filled with kids pointing at toys, parents bargaining or sighing, and bright colors flashing from every corner. The boys each chose something small, nothing too expensive, because they knew their parents wouldn't approve of unnecessary spending. She paid for the items which the parents had already prepared for. After the toy store, they visited a few more places, including a small snack shop where the twins shared a warm pretzel. She took only a small piece when they insisted she try it. She didn't want to take anything from them, but they insisted with the pure kind of generosity only children have, as they continued walking. They noticed a crowd forming near the center of the mall. People were standing around, clapping, talking, and recording something on their phones. Curious, the twins pulled at her hands, urging her to see what was happening. She tried to resist at first, but the boys insisted so strongly that she finally agreed. When they reached the crowd, the sound became clearer, piano was playing, and someone on stage was performing. The music echoed beautifully through the wide space, rising above the chatter of the crowd. The twins pushed gently through the people, and she followed them, keeping a careful eye on them while trying not to draw attention to herself. In the center of the stage area was a shiny black piano. Different contestants were taking turns playing it. It seemed to be a talent showcase organized by a local event group. People of different ages walked up one by one, some nervous, some confident, each playing their favorite piece. The twins stood with their mouths slightly open, fully focused on the stage. They loved anything that made noise or had rhythm. She stood behind them quietly, watching the piano with a calm expression. She didn't clap loudly, didn't push forward, didn't try to get a better view. She was used to blending into the background, making sure the boys were safe and happy. But as she watched someone play a slow melody, something stirred behind her calm expression. Her eyes softened in a way she didn't notice herself. Her posture changed, just slightly, as if the music had reached a place inside her that stayed silent most of the time. She didn't realize that the boys had turned to look at her. They noticed every small change in her face. "Do you like the piano?" one of the twins asked, tugging gently at her sleeve. The other leaned closer, watching her carefully. She blinked and gave a small smile, trying to hide her thoughts. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "Can you play it?" the other twin asked boldly. Her smile faded for a second. She shook her head lightly and looked away. No. "I haven't played anything," she said quickly, her voice almost too soft. But the boys weren't convinced. Children can sense things adults overlook. They saw the way her eyes followed the movement of the piano player's hands. They noticed how her breathing changed slightly with the melody. It wasn't something they could explain. But they knew she wasn't telling the whole truth. One of the boys raised his hand toward the host, standing near the side of the stage, as kids often do without thinking of the results. Before she could stop him, the boy called out loudly, "She can play." She froze. The crowd turned. The host smiled warmly, thinking the boy was simply excited. "Oh, you can play the piano?" he asked, speaking toward her with the microphone. Her heart felt as if it stopped. She shook her head quickly, waving her hand slightly to deny it. No, she said again, her face turning warm with embarrassment. The twins looked up at her with pure innocence. They didn't understand why she was suddenly nervous. The host, not wanting to push too hard, smiled politely. But the people nearby began encouraging her lightly. "Just soft words, let her try. Just one moment. It's just for fun. It's nothing unkind." But enough to make her feel trapped. She swallowed hard. Her eyes lowered, and she felt the old fear that always came when she stood in front of strangers. She didn't like attention. She didn't like being watched. She didn't like the idea of making a mistake in front of people she didn't know. The twins tugged on her hands again. "Please," one whispered. "Just a little." They weren't trying to push her into something uncomfortable. They were simply fascinated by the idea of her playing. She looked at them, then at the piano, then at the small crowd waiting quietly. The music had stopped, and the next performer stepped aside, giving her space. She could say no. She could walk away, and the moment would pass. But for the first time in a long while, a small part of her wanted to touch the piano. Not for the crowd, not for attention, for something inside herself that she had ignored for years. She took a slow breath, nodded once, and stepped forward. The crowd parted gently to let her through. She walked with careful steps, trying to keep her breathing steady. The twins followed her with wide eyes, more excited than nervous. She reached the piano and placed her hand on the smooth surface for a moment, as if feeling the weight of the moment. The host stepped aside, giving her space. She sat slowly, her hands resting quietly on her lap at first. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She lifted her hands, hesitated, and then placed her fingers lightly on the keys. They felt cold at first, unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. She closed her eyes for a second, not to remember a song. But to calm her nerves, the crowd waited. The twins watched, and she took the first deep breath that would change everything that followed, the moment she placed her fingers on the piano keys. It felt as if the entire mall had gone quiet, even though people were still talking and moving in the distance. She kept her gaze low, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, and she wasn't sure if she would actually be able to play anything. It had been years since she last touched a piano. years since her life had become too busy for any kind of dream. The twins stood close to the stage, their small hands gripping the edge of the platform as if afraid she might run away. They looked at her with such open trust that she felt a strange calm settle over her heart. She had never wanted attention from anyone, and certainly not from a crowd full of strangers. Yet here she was, sitting in front of a piano in the center of a busy mall, with people waiting for her to make a sound. She took one more breath, slow and steady, and pressed down on a single key. The soft note floated into the air, trembling slightly. Her hands shook from nerves, not from lack of skill. A second note followed, then another. The melody she chose was simple at first, something she remembered from long ago. Her fingers moved uncertainly, as if reconnecting with a forgotten language. The first few seconds were quiet and fragile, like a thin thread that could break at any moment. But as she continued, something inside her shifted. She felt the familiar weight of each key, the gentle resistance beneath her fingertips, the way sound responded to her touch. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and her fingers began to move more naturally. The crowd leaned in. The twins stood completely still, their eyes wide. Slowly, the melody began to grow fuller, steadier, more confident. Her fingers glided across the keys in a way that surprised even herself. It was as though her hands remembered something her mind had forgotten. She didn't think about the people watching or whether she looked nervous. For a moment, the noise of them all faded away, and it felt like she was alone in a quiet room, playing for no one but herself. The tune she played wasn't complicated. It was a soft, flowing piece that carried emotions instead of fancy notes. Each part of the melody held a memory of her childhood home, of late nights practicing in secret, of dreams she once had before life forced her in another direction. A few people from the crowd started recording. The host watched with raised eyebrows. Parents who had been shopping stopped and turned. Some people didn't know music well, but they could feel sincerity in every note she played. She didn't look up once. Her eyes stayed half closed, her breathing steady, and the world outside the music faded into a blur. Her fingers moved faster, then slower, then gentle again. The piece carried her through emotions she hadn't touched in years, and it showed in the delicate way she shaped each sound. People whispered softly. Things like, "She's good," and "Where did she learn?" A few even stepped closer to get a better view. The twins didn't move at all. They didn't blink. They watched her as though seeing her for the first time. When the last note finally faded, the silence that followed was brief but full. Then the crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but steady and warm. She flinched at the sudden sound and lifted her hands from the keys quickly, as if burned. Her heart pounded again, not with fear this time, but with surprise. She stood up too quickly, almost fumbling, and stepped away from the piano. The host approached with a gentle smile and thanked her for playing. She bowed her head slightly, unsure how to respond. Praise always made her uncomfortable. She had never been the kind of person who believed she deserved compliments. The twins rushed toward her, their eyes shining and their faces glowing with excitement. "You can play," one of them shouted. "Why didn't you tell us?" The other added. Their voices were full of genuine admiration, not the kind that exaggerates or tries to impress. She smiled awkwardly and shook her head. "It's just something I used to do," she said, hoping to move on quickly. But the boys wouldn't let the moment slip away. They talked about how amazing she was, how she should play again, how they wanted to tell their parents immediately. She tried to calm them, reminding them that the mall was busy and they needed to stay close. The host invited her to sign up for the showcase, officially. But she declined politely. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the opportunity. She just didn't see herself standing on stages or participating in public events. She wasn't a performer. She was simply someone who once had a dream and kept it hidden, because life didn't allow space for it. As she tried to step away, a woman approached her. She looked around her mid-40s, holding a folder and wearing a badge that suggested she was part of the event's organizing team. She smiled warmly and said, "You play beautifully. Have you learned professionally?" The maid hesitated. "No," she said softly. "I learned on my own." The woman looked surprised, but impressed. "You have real talent. If you ever want to join classes or take part in future events, let me know. People like you shouldn't hide this." The maid felt her cheeks warm again. She thanked the woman politely, but didn't agree to anything. As the woman walked away, the crowd slowly dispersed and moved on to the next performer. The mall returned to its usual noise. She took the twins' hands and guided them away from the stage area. Wanting to disappear into a quieter corner of the mall, the boys, however, couldn't stop talking. "How did you learn? Why didn't you tell us? Can you teach us?" Their excitement made her heart soften. She answered them honestly, but with few words. "I used to practice when I was young." That's all. They wanted to hear more. But she gently encouraged them to continue with their day, instead of focusing on her. But even as they walked toward the food court, she could feel eyes on her, curious glances from people who had seen her play. It made her uncomfortable. She had spent years blending into the background, and now, for the first time, she felt exposed. She found a small table near the corner of the food court, away from the busier areas. The twins sat down eagerly, swinging their legs, still talking about the piano. She listened with a quiet smile, but her mind was elsewhere. It wasn't the performance itself that troubled her. It was what it awakened. She had buried her love for music so deeply that she almost forgot it existed. Life had never allowed her time or resources to pursue it. School had been difficult enough. Her family needed income, not dreams. So she had chosen the most practical path, work that paid steadily. Work that kept food on the table. But the moment her fingers touched the piano, everything she had pushed aside rushed back. The twins ordered fries and milkshakes, and she helped them unwrap their food, reminding them to eat slowly and not make a mess. They behaved better around her than with anyone else. She looked at them and smiled softly, grateful for the small bond they shared. Halfway through their meal, one of the boys looked at her and said, "You look different when you played." She paused. "Different?" He nodded. "You looked happy," the other twin agreed quickly. "Yeah, like you were somewhere else." She didn't know how to respond. Children noticed things adults didn't. They didn't judge or complicate simple truths. They just observed. "I was just remembering things," she said gently. "Good things?" one asked. She nodded. "Yes, good things." The boys smiled at her, satisfied with that answer, as they finished their food and prepared to leave the food court. The mall speakers announced another round of performances. She stiffened slightly, not because she feared being called again, but because hearing the music reminded her how much she missed it. The twins held her hands again as they walked through the mall, quieter now, but still glancing at her every few minutes as if trying to understand something they couldn't put into words. When they finally reached the exit, she breathed a small sigh of relief. The fresh air outside helped calm her thoughts. The boys climbed into the car, still energized from the unexpected excitement of the afternoon, during the ride home. They kept whispering about telling their parents what happened. They took turns reenacting her playing the piano, using their hands to mimic the motions. She tried gently to tell them not to make a big deal out of it, but she knew it was pointless. They were too amazed to keep quiet. The car pulled up to the large house, and the boys jumped out immediately, running toward the front door with the same energy they had left with. She followed them more slowly, feeling a mix of exhaustion and something she couldn't quite name. Before she even stepped inside, she heard the twins shouting for their parents. She hurried forward, not wanting to cause any trouble or misunderstanding. The parents appeared from the hallway, looking confused by their son's excitement. The boys started talking over each other, trying to explain everything at once. Words like piano, amazing, mall, and she played echoed through the hallway. The maid froze in the doorway, unsure what to do. The parents turned toward her with questioning eyes. Waiting for her to confirm or deny whatever the boys were saying, she lowered her gaze and clasped her hands together. Unsure of how to explain this was the moment she feared, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she never wanted extra attention or questions, and yet everything she tried to avoid was now standing right in front of her, waiting quietly for the truth she'll never plan to reveal. When she stood in the doorway with the twins shouting excitedly and the parents staring in surprise, The maid felt the same nervous feeling she used to get when she was a child, caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. She didn't know whether she should step forward or quietly disappear into the kitchen. The twins' voices filled the hallway, overlapping in a way only children's excitement can manage. She played the piano. One shouted she played so good. The other added, almost jumping as he spoke. The parents exchanged confused glances, then turned their eyes back to her. The father raised an eyebrow gently. The mother tilted her head as though trying to understand something she'd somehow missed all this time. For a moment, nobody spoke. The twins kept pulling on their parents' arms, trying to convince them to listen fully, but the parents waited patiently, wanting to hear from her directly. The maid lowered her gaze out of habit. "They are exaggerating," she finally said softly. "I only played a little." The boys insisted. Both parents stepped closer. Their expressions weren't upset at all, only surprised and perhaps a little curious. The mother smiled gently. "They told us you played beautifully. Is that true?" The maid felt her face warm. She shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't like that." But the twins wouldn't let her downplay anything. Everyone clapped. One of them insisted. "They all watched her," shouted the other. She sighed quietly, realizing there was no way to escape this conversation. The parents invited her into the living room so they could talk properly. She hesitated at first but followed silently, knowing it would look strange if she refused. The twins ran ahead, still full of energy, while she walked slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. The parents sat on the couch, and she remained standing until they urged her to sit too. She chose the very edge of the chair, her hands resting neatly in her lap. She felt small in that large living room with its tall ceilings, expensive paintings, and soft lights. The father leaned forward slightly. "We had no idea you could play the piano," he said. His tone wasn't demanding or suspicious, just honest. She looked down, unsure how to answer. "It's been a long time," she finally said. "I used to practice when I was younger, but I stopped." The mother watched her closely. "Stopped? Why?" The maid hesitated again. Some stories were easy to tell. Others carried years of heavy memories behind them. She took a breath and spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "My family didn't have much," she said. "I learned on an old piano someone gave us. I practiced whenever I could. But when I grew older, things changed. I needed to work. There wasn't time for music anymore." The parents listened quietly. The father nodded with understanding. The mother's expression softened. "And today?" the mother asked gently. "The boys said you played beautifully." The maid lowered her eyes again. They were excited. "That's all." But the father smiled slightly, not in amusement but in respect. "They are excited for a reason. They don't usually exaggerate when it comes to things like this." The maid knew the boys loved honesty. If they said something amazed them, they meant it. Still, she didn't want the family to think she wanted attention or recognition. She had always believed in doing her work quietly. Without asking for more, the twins jumped onto the couch between their parents, unaware of how tense she felt. "She should play here," one said. "We want to hear it again." She quickly shook her head. No, I don't think that's a good idea." The father raised his hand gently, calming the boys. "Let her speak." She appreciated the small gesture. After a moment, she explained softly, "I don't play for people. It was just a moment. I didn't think much of it." Mother leaned forward a little. "But you must understand. Talent like that doesn't just disappear. If you still love it, you shouldn't hide it." The maid didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to adults encouraging her dreams. Life had taught her that dreams were luxuries, something she couldn't afford, before she could say anything else. The twins started talking again, describing every detail of her mall performance, the crowd, the applause, the melody, everything. The parents listened with quiet fascination, watching their son's expressions more than the words themselves. The maid felt overwhelmed. She wanted to explain everything and nothing at the same time. She wanted to say she didn't deserve attention, that she wasn't special, that the moment at the mall wasn't something that should change anything. but the look in the parents' eyes told her they saw something different. After a long conversation, the parents finally let the topic rest, perhaps sensing she was too overwhelmed to talk further. They thanked her for taking care of the boys, especially with the unexpected responsibility of the mall trip. She nodded softly and stood up, excusing herself to return to her work. As she walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, she could still hear the twins talking about her. It made her smile, even though it also made her nervous. She didn't want rumors or attention. She just wanted peace. That night, after everyone went to bed, she stood in the quiet kitchen washing dishes. She worked slowly, her mind replaying every detail of the day: the piano, the crowd, the applause, the parents' questions, the boys' excitement. She didn't know how she felt. Part of her was proud. Part of her was terrified. Later, when she lay in her small room at the back of the house, she stared at the ceiling and let out a long breath. Her hands still tingled with the memory of the piano keys. She thought about the music she once used to play every evening, the melodies she composed secretly, the dreams she had of performing someday. She had buried all of that, convinced that life had no space for it. But now, it felt as though her past had found her again. The next morning, she woke early as always, prepared breakfast for the household, and ensured everything was tidy before the twins woke. The house was quiet, and she appreciated those peaceful hours the most. When the twins came down, they greeted her brightly, still talking about the piano. She tried to gently shift the conversation to school, breakfast, or anything else, but they weren't done discussing it. "You should play again," one said. "Please," the other added. "Just one song?" She shook her head with a soft smile. "Maybe another time?" They pouted but didn't push further. They had school after all, and breakfast waiting, while the twins ate. The mother came into the kitchen to pour herself tea. She stood next to the maid quietly for a moment before saying, "You know, if you want, we have a piano in the guest lounge." The maid froze. She hadn't known about that piano. She had never stepped inside that room, except to clean it quickly. The mother continued gently, "You can use it any time. No pressure." The maid didn't know what to say. She wanted to refuse, but the kindness in the mother's voice made it difficult. She simply nodded slowly. After the boys left for school, the house became quiet again. She cleaned the rooms, vacuumed the hallways, dusted the shelves, and washed the dishes. She tried to distract herself with work, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. By late afternoon, she passed by the guest lounge by accident. The door was open slightly. She hesitated, wondering if she should close it. But her eyes drifted to the piano inside. It was beautiful, larger than the one at the mall. It was polished, shining under the soft light. She felt something inside her tighten, like a quiet ache. She stepped inside slowly, almost without realizing. Her steps were light, hesitant, as though she were walking on forbidden ground. When she reached the piano, she placed her hand on it the same way she had at the mall, gently. As though greeting an old friend, she sat on the bench for only a moment before standing quickly, afraid someone might see her. She backed away, reminding herself that she wasn't here to play. She had work, responsibilities, things she needed to focus on. But that evening, when the parents returned home, something unexpected happened. The father entered the living room holding his phone. "Is this you?" he asked the maid, showing her a video. She froze. The video was of her mall performance, recorded by someone from the crowd. It had been posted online and was beginning to gain attention. People were leaving comments calling her talented, saying she had emotion in her playing, wondering who she was. The maid's heart raced. She didn't like seeing herself on a screen. She didn't like knowing strangers had watched her. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't want this. I didn't know someone would post it." The father lowered the phone gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. You didn't do anything wrong." Olive approached too. "People shared it because they were moved, not because they wanted to cause trouble." The maid shook her head. "I don't want people watching me. I'm just—" She couldn't find the right words. The mother finished the sentence for her in a kind voice. "Just trying to live your life quietly?" She nodded. The parents exchanged a glance, and then smiled softly. "We respect that," the father said. "But just know this, you have something special." Those words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the hallways empty, she walked toward the guest lounge again. This time, she didn't stop at the door. She stepped inside, sat at the piano, and let her fingers touch the keys. She didn't play loudly or try anything grand. She played softly, letting the notes fill the empty room like a whisper. She didn't know it. Someone was passing by the hallway. A shadow paused at the door, listening. It was the mother. She didn't interrupt. She simply stood there for a moment, smiling gently, then walked away quietly. The maid finished the piece and closed the piano slowly. Her hands lingered on the keys for a final moment. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how her life might change, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid of her own talent. She felt alive. The next morning arrived quietly, soft sunlight slipping through the curtains of the guest room, where the maid had been staying temporarily. She woke up earlier than everyone else, the way she always did, because she believed mornings carried a calm that the rest of the day rarely offered. She moved quietly, preparing herself before stepping into the wide hallways of the mansion. Even after months of working there, she still felt a sense of awe at how silent and grand the place appeared at dawn. When she entered the kitchen, the cooks were already busy, but they greeted her warmly. She helped with small things they asked for, even though it wasn't required of her. She liked keeping her hands busy, and she liked being useful. Meanwhile, the billionaire's twin sons were still asleep upstairs. After what happened at the mall, they looked at her differently. They didn't treat her like someone hired to follow them around anymore. They treated her like someone they respected. And for her, that was enough to make the long hours worth it. As she walked toward the living room to organize a few scattered toys the twins had left the night before, the house manager approached her. He was carrying a tablet and looked slightly stressed, which wasn't unusual since he handled hundreds of things every day, he informed her. That the billionaire wanted to see her in his study after breakfast, her heart tightened. She wondered if she had done something wrong. Maybe she had stepped out of line by touching that piano in the mall. Maybe she wasn't supposed to. She knew that people in her position were expected to stay quiet, follow instructions, and avoid drawing attention. Still, she nodded politely and continued her morning tasks. When the twins finally woke up, they rushed downstairs, full of energy like always. But the moment they saw her, they slowed down. One of them grinned widely. "You played the piano really good," he said proudly, like he was presenting her talent to the whole world. The other twin added, "We told Dad what happened." She didn't know whether to smile or panic. They didn't notice her worry. They simply moved around her, chatting excitedly about how cool it was when people in the mall had stopped to listen to her play. They kept replaying the moment as if it had been their own achievement. And in a way, it warmed Herbie, because they weren't bragging. They were genuinely happy for her. After breakfast, she walked toward the study with careful steps. She knocked softly. A deep voice told her to come in. The billionaire stood by the window, looking over the large garden outside. He turned when she entered. He didn't look angry, which helped her relax a little. He thanked her first for taking care of his boys, for being patient with them, and for handling their energy better than most adults could. She felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Then he mentioned the mall. She held her breath, but instead of scolding her, he asked how long she had been playing piano. She hesitated before answering. She told him the truth that she learned when she was younger, before life became too heavy and responsibilities began stacking up. She told him she hadn't touched a piano in years until that moment in the mall. He listened quietly. His eyes softened. Then he did something she never expected. He asked her to consider teaching the twins piano. She almost stepped back in surprise. She explained gently that she was just a maid, not a teacher. But he disagreed. He said his sons wouldn't have asked anyone else. They didn't trust Isalie, but they trusted her. They felt safe with her. And if she was willing, he would make arrangements. She didn't know what to say. Her hands trembled slightly from the sudden shift in her world. She had come here to work, not to revive forgotten dreams. Still, She agreed cautiously. The billionaire nodded with satisfaction. He said they would begin with simple lessons when she felt ready. Then he dismissed her kindly, leaving her to walk out of the study with her mind spinning. Later that afternoon, as the boys played in the garden, she sat on a bench watching them. She didn't tell them yet about their father's suggestion. She wasn't sure how to bring it up. But when the twins ran toward her with bright smiles, she felt a warmth that pushed her worries aside. They asked if she could take them to the play area at the far end of the garden. She agreed, even though she felt drained from the emotional morning as they walked. She noticed a gardener struggling with a large pot. Without hesitating, she went over to help him lift it. The twins watched her quietly. They admired how she was always ready to help anyone, no matter the task. One of the boys whispered. "Dad says she's brave," the other responded. "She's cool." That simple moment made her smile. Later that evening, after dinner, the billionaire called for her again. This time, he was not alone. A woman stood next to him, someone she recognized as the boy's aunt. A woman who visited occasionally and always carried an air of authority. The aunt studied her from head to toe with keen eyes. She greeted her politely but firmly, asking detailed questions about the twins' behavior, routines, and even their emotional habits. It felt like being interviewed again, except more personal. Then the aunt shifted the topic to the mall incident. The maid felt her heart jolt again. She wondered if the aunt disapproved, but instead, the aunt asked her to play something for her. Right there in the mansion, she hesitated. She really wasn't prepared, but the billionaire nodded gently, encouraging her. So she followed them to the music room. She stared at the grand piano in the middle of the room. It felt different from the small display piano in the mall. It felt heavier, richer, almost intimidating. Still, she sat down. She placed her fingers on the keys. Her hands trembled a little, but she took a slow breath. Then she began to play. It started softly, it's like a whisper, but grew warmer and more confident with every passing second. She played a tune she remembered from her childhood one. She used to practice when she still believed she had a future in music. When she finished, the room was silent. The aunt stared at her with surprise, her expression slightly softened. The billionaire looked proud. Even the boys, who had run into the room partway through the performance, stood frozen with admiration. The aunt finally spoke. She said the maid had something rare, something she shouldn't bury. The billionaire agreed. The maid didn't know what to do with such words. They felt too heavy, too unexpected. After the family left the room, she sat alone at the piano for a while longer. She touched the keys gently, almost like she was afraid they would vanish. She couldn't remember the last time someone genuinely encouraged her talent. Most of her life had been spent working, surviving, and doing whatever was necessary to keep going. But this felt different. That night, as she got ready for bed, she felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, hope, confusion, and a quiet spark that she thought had died long ago. She didn't know where this path would lead. She only knew one thing. Her life was no longer as simple as it was yesterday. The next morning began with a quiet stillness that felt different from the usual routine. The maid woke up before sunrise as always, but instead of rushing through her morning tasks, she sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting the events of the previous day settle inside her. She had played the grand piano in the mansion for the first time, and everyone had listened, really listened. That memory alone felt like a soft flame glowing inside her chest. She got dressed and walked to the kitchen, as she always did. The staff greeted her with warm smiles, and one of the cooks asked gently if the rumors she heard were true, that the maid had impressed the family with her hidden talent. She felt her face heat up and gave a shy nod, trying not to draw attention. The cook laughed softly and told her she should be proud. The maid returned to her tasks, but her mind kept drifting. It wasn't that she wanted praise or recognition. It was just strange to be seen in a way she had not been seen in years. When the twins woke up, they came running toward her with their usual loud energy. But today, they looked at her with a little more admiration. They kept asking when she would start teaching them piano. She smiled, promising to talk to their father first. The day passed quickly, as the mansion remained busy. Important guests were scheduled to arrive later in the afternoon: business partners, family friends, and people who often visited for meetings or gatherings. Everything had to be perfect. The maid helped the house staff prepare the guest rooms, arrange fresh flowers, and make sure the place looked welcoming. Even with the heavy workload, she kept a light mood, making others around her feel calmer. Around noon, while she was folding linens, the billionaire walked into the hallway. He paused when he saw her and invited her to speak with him privately. She followed him to the study with steady but nervous steps. Inside, he thanked her again for everything she had done for his sons. He mentioned how the boys had become more confident around her, more disciplined, and more open about their feelings. Then he asked directly whether she would be willing to take on the role of piano instructor for them, not full-time, but as part of her routine, if that was comfortable for her. The maid hesitated. She reminded him gently that she was still just a maid. She didn't say it in a way that begged for pity only, in a way that showed respect for boundaries. But the billionaire shook his head. He said he could find a professional teacher easily, but his sons would not open up to anyone the way they opened up to her. They trusted her. That trust meant more to him than hiring the most decorated pianist in the world. Her heart tightened at his sincerity. He told her to think about it at her own pace. There was no pressure. She thanked him and left the study feeling overwhelmed, but deeply grateful. Later that afternoon, guests began arriving. The mansion grew louder. Laughter echoed from the living room. Conversations spread through the hallways. Even the twins became more excited, running around to greet familiar faces. During the gathering, one of the guests, a woman known for her love of classical music, noticed the piano in the music room and casually asked if anyone in the house played. Before the billionaire could answer, the twins eagerly pointed at the maid. "She's really good," one of the boys announced proudly. The room went quiet for a moment. The maid felt her cheeks burn. She tried to step back, but the billionaire encouraged her softly. The guests smiled kindly, not mocking or judging. The woman asked if she would be comfortable playing something simple. The maid took a small breath, walked slowly to the piano, and sat down again. The guests stepped closer, forming a loose circle around her. The twins sat right at the front, legs crossed, eyes shining. She placed her hands on the keys. For a second, she felt the same fear she had felt years ago, the fear of not being good enough. The fear that she didn't belong in a room full of wealthy, educated people. But then she reminded herself of what the twins always told her that she made. Music sounded warm, so she let her fingers move. The melody drifted through the room gently at first, then grew deeper. She didn't play anything complicated. She chose something soft, something that felt like a quiet story rather than a performance meant to impress. When she finished, the room filled with warm applause. The woman who loved classical music wiped a tear from her eye and said the piece was beautiful. The maid thanked her quietly. She didn't know what else to say. As the guests continued talking among themselves, several of them approached her, asking friendly questions about how she learned to play. She answered each one politely, never exaggerating anything. One guest even suggested that she consider taking lessons again, or participating in small local events, if she ever felt ready. The idea sounded unbelievable to her, like something meant for another life, but she didn't dismiss it. Later that evening, when the crowd eased down and most of the guests left, the billionaire's sister approached her. She had been quiet the entire day, simply observing. Now she spoke in a calm, steady tone. She told the maid that talent like hers shouldn't stay hidden forever. She said she understood how hard life could be, and how some dreams were forced to sleep because survival came first. But if there was even a small chance for her to bring back what she once loved, she should consider taking it. The maid listened quietly, unsure how to respond. Then the sister added something gentle but firm, a reminder that talent doesn't belong to only those born into comfort. Sometimes the strongest talent grows in difficult places. The maid felt her chest grow warm. No one had ever spoken to her like that. That night, as the house calmed and the twins finally went to bed after a long and exciting day, the maid walked back to the music room alone. The grand piano sat silently in the dim light. She sat down once more, not to play for anyone, not to impress guests, not to fulfill a request. She played for herself. A simple melody, soft, honest. One she hadn't played since she was very young. As the notes flowed through the empty room, something inside her slowly began to change. She felt lighter. She felt stronger. She felt like she had been carrying a hidden part of herself for years, and now it finally had space to breathe. When she finished, she let her hands rest on the keys for a long moment. She didn't know what her future would look like. She didn't know whether she would continue working as a maid or slowly move toward music again, or balance both worlds. She didn't know whether the billionaire's family would remain in her life, ever, or only for a moment. But she did know this. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what she could become. She wasn't afraid of her own talent. She wasn't afraid of being seen, and that alone was enough to change everything. When she stood up and left the room, she walked with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. Her story wasn't finished yet. It was just beginning.